Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. Today on this channel, I am going to be talking about the fear of commitment. So if you are at all engaged in the attachment style community, which I'm guessing you are if you have found your way here, you will know that the fear of commitment is something that is often ascribed to avoidant leaning attachment styles, whether that is the dismissive avoidant or the fearful avoidant. And it's often talked about as though it is random and irrational. So someone could be in the perfect relationship, they could have all of their needs getting fulfilled, they could be perfectly happy, and yet this fear of commitment will just kind of crop up out of nowhere because it's like this defect or character flaw that avoidant leaning types have. And I am here to completely disagree with that definition of the term. I believe strongly that the fear of commitment is always a rational fear, but it's not the commitment itself that the person is likely afraid of. So I would like to invite you to think about, in this video, fear of commitment as kind of similar to a food aversion. If you are someone who is not super in tune with your emotions and who is not always aware of what is and isn't working for them in interpersonal relationships on a conscious level, it's kind of like eating a smoothie where some ingredient within the smoothie is spoiled. But because you don't have good discernment about what it is within that smoothie that is upsetting your stomach, you don't really know why, after a few times of having that same smoothie, you're suddenly feeling averse to the entire thing. And I would like to suggest that the fear of commitment in romantic relationships, specifically when we're looking at people who err more avoidant on the attachment spectrum, can be very similar to having a food aversion. So something happens within the relationship that you're uncomfortable with, that maybe hurts your feelings, that you don't want to engage with any further. And yet, because you don't have good discernment about what it is that hurts you emotionally, you start to feel adverse to the entire relationship. And when you think about planning a future with that person, you might get that sense of queasiness without understanding why. And so in this video, we're not going to talk about how to get rid of your fear of commitment. We're going to talk about how to get in touch with what your fear is telling you, about which boundaries you might need to have within your relationships, about how you may be showing up inside of the relationship in a way that you don't like, and about what is actually important for you within a relationship that you may be neglecting at this point. So again, this isn't about getting rid of the fear. It's about listening to the fear and letting it inform you about which ingredients you need to take out of that smoothie so that it starts going down more easily. Step one is to stop gaslighting yourself and pretending that your fear is irrational and coming out of nowhere. So the number one thing I'm going to ask you to consider about the fear of commitment is the possibility that it's not the other person you're necessarily afraid of committing to long term. It's probably the version of yourself that you are within the relationship with that other person that you're afraid of committing to long term. So something I want to note here is that, again, we often see the fear of commitment as kind of an avoidant problem. I don't believe that's fully true. I believe someone who's just a little bit avoidant is not going to have a huge fear of commitment because they're not distorting their identity that strongly to be in relationship. But if you have someone who is severely avoidant or anxious, because it is absolutely a massive spectrum, you are going to have a person on either side of that spectrum at the extreme ends who is massively distorting their personality and who they authentically are in order to be in attachment relationships. They will be doing it for different reasons, but both those people will be operating under a very false persona. Now, how does this relate back to the fear of commitment? If you are significantly distorting who you are and playing a role that is not completely authentic to your true embodied experience of being alive in attachment relationships, you are naturally going to start fearing a future of having to always play that role. So some good questions to start off asking yourself. If you notice a fear of commitment coming online for you in a relationship that you would like to commit to long term, might be, in which ways am I not showing up authentically in this relationship? What parts of myself do I lie about or keep hidden on a regular basis in order to stay in comfortable connection with this other person? Who am I pretending to be that I'm not? So again, secure people bring their whole selves into romantic relationships. Yeah, they put their best foot forward at first, but even then, they're relatively open and straightforward about the things that those of us who err more insecurely attached are guarding with our absolute lives in attachment relationships. So a thought experiment to do around this is think about what the differences are between the way that you show up when you are either alone with yourself or with someone who you feel like you're completely authentic around. Like if you happen to have, and not everyone will, a close friend or someone else in your life who you just do not think before you speak around. What are the differences between the way that you show up in that relationship and the way that you show up in a romantic relationship? Or when you feel kind of exhausted and like you need a break from your romantic relationship, what energy inside of yourself is it that you want a break from? What is the social role you're playing that you want a break from playing? The more clear you can get on that, the more you can start to do that work of isolating that ingredient, right? What is it about the way I am showing up that I don't like and that my body is having an instinctive fear response to at the thought of having to show up that way fairly consistently for the rest of my life? The next thing I'm going to recommend in this process of figuring out where your fear of commitment is coming from and starting to work with it is using the discussed responses that come online for you as useful information about what you don't like within your relationship. So this is going to be something that is a fairly common response for those who are avoidant, but can also come online quite strongly for those who are severely anxiously attached, is this sense of suddenly and inexplicably feeling disgust towards your partner in circumstances where you consciously feel as though you shouldn't be feeling disgust and as though you should just accept them as they are. So there can be this kind of tug of war between your body and your brain, what you are feeling and what you want to be feeling. Now, when we are experiencing disgust and we are not being conscious about it, we're not really putting any thought into where it comes from or what it means, it's often going to come out as contempt towards our partners. So they're going to do something, we're going to get the ick, we're not going to know why, and we're not going to process it any further. Maybe we're just going to be rude or dismissive towards our partner in that moment. Or maybe we're going to retreat and kind of ruminate on the fact that this thing they do disgusts us. When we become a little bit more conscious of that disgust response, what we're likely to do is start shaming ourselves for having it. So a lot of us feel something along the lines of, I should accept my partner completely. I should not feel disgust towards them. Ergo, if I'm feeling it, I'm just going to retreat for a while, wait until the feeling passes, and then return to the relationship only when I'm able to do so with complete and total love and acceptance of my partner, which often involves me wearing that social mask that I've come to wear so well. I'm going to suggest here that you start looking at disgust as a potential indication of what you don't like within your relationship. Disgust on a biological level is designed to help humans understand what is and is not safe and good for consumption. And the same is true emotionally. Feeling disgust towards either ourselves or someone else does not mean that we or the other people are inherently shameful and bad and should be altogether rejected. It's just an indication that something we're coming across is something we don't want to consume. And if we can stay with disgust in a non-judgmental way for long enough, if we can sit with the feeling inside of our own bodies, often we're going to find that underneath it, there's some kind of pain, some kind of anger, or some kind of negative emotion that actually serves as incredibly useful information. So I'll give an example here. Let's say you are lying in bed one day with your partner, and they look up at you and they have these giant loving doe eyes, and they're just looking at you like you are an absolute dream and the best thing that's ever happened to them, and you get a giant sense of disgust flowing through your body as a response. It would be easy to shame yourself for this response. It would be easy to go, that's just me and my fear of commitment. But what if you sit with it for another moment and ask yourself, what is it that I don't like about this? Maybe your partner is in their child self in that moment. Maybe they're displaying a degree of vulnerability that is a little bit excessive. And maybe your partner is quite frequently in their child self. So in a state where they are extremely vulnerable and looking to you for protection and care. And maybe that naturally forces you into the parent role in your dynamic quite a bit. When you are playing the parent role, it means you must be completely self-regulated and attentive to the needs of your partner. And maybe what you're really wanting and craving in a romantic partnership is two people being in their adult selves, rather than frequently retreating to that parent-child role. And that sense of disgust, if you really listen to it, it's not telling you something is inherently flawed with your partner or with you. It might just be alerting you to the fact that you are back in a dynamic with your partner that some part of you does not like or is growing to resent. And that is very useful information to have. So by sitting with those feelings of disgust and getting to the root of them, we start to develop discernment, once again, about what exactly it is within the dynamic that we don't like or that we are starting to feel averse to. So the next tip I'm going to give on working with the fear of commitment is figuring out what you would need to do to more consistently align your inner and outer world. Put yourself for a period of time under observation mode and just get really curious about noticing when you're around your partner or when you're thinking about your relationship, what body state you're in. How often are you relaxed? How often are you feeling open and free-flowing in your energy? Versus how often are you feeling tense? How often are you feeling reserved? How often are you kind of clenching your muscles? And the more you can start to notice patterns of which types of situations or circumstances those kind of tense, resistant body sensations arrive in, the more discernment you're going to develop around which situations you tend to not show up authentically to. Or if you err more on the dissociative side of things when it comes to the way in which your resistant to reality responses come online, you might find that you are just suddenly feeling extremely bored, tired, zoned out in certain interactions with your partner. All of those things can indicate repressed anger or repressed strong emotions that the mind is trying to put you to sleep to. So ask yourself, if I were to change my body state in this moment, if I were to let go of either the tension and the clenching in my body, or if I were to become more associated and focused on the present moment in those times when I'm noticing myself kind of zoning out and leaving the present moment, what would I be feeling in that moment? What is it that I am resisting or that I don't want to let into my body in this relationship? Is there something my partner says or does that actually really pisses me off, or that actually I am really not okay with? And what would happen? Just run this through your mind as a thought experiment first. What would happen if I shared my authentic feeling in that moment? What would happen if I expressed that I felt angry? What would happen if I expressed that I did not agree with what they were saying or doing? Maybe you feel like you have too many irrational feelings, like the things that you would be taking issue with are too small or they are not valid enough to bring up. Doesn't matter. Just imagine what would happen if you did it anyway, and you got your inner and outer state aligned. This experiment is going to start giving you information about the areas in which you are not showing up for yourself, and the areas in which you are self-abandoning and putting yourself to sleep in order to keep engaging with. And those are the parts of yourself that are going to start to panic when you think about making a commitment. Because those parts of yourself are like, wait, I don't want to hide away forever. I don't want to have to numb myself out forever. I don't want to have to back down in situations that I feel strongly about forever, right? Now you're getting really precise about exactly what it is that you're not bringing into the relationship. And at this point, I want to give some resources. So if you actually want to start communicating more directly with your partner as you start to become aware of these areas in which you've been repressing things like anger or things like excitement, whatever emotion it is that you naturally tend to dissociate from, tone down within yourself, etc. There are a lot of different approaches you could use for communicating those things. So a very kind of gentle approach to difficult conversations can be nonviolent communication, which there are books and training seminars by the dozen out there. If you do a quick Google of nonviolent communication, you are highly likely to find some immediate resources. The next one, and this is the one that, if I'm being honest, has helped me the most. However, it is kind of a highly potent chemical that I hesitate to recommend across the board. But the philosophy of radical honesty, if you go online and Google it, you can pick up the book by Brad Blanton that will explain the philosophy to you very simply and directly. And it talks a lot about how to get in touch with those repressed emotions and communicate them with people directly in order to get on the same page. The reason I give caveats when I recommend radical honesty is that the philosophy itself is a very quick way to tear down a lot of the psychological defenses that we've built. And I believe that in some cases, if that happens too quickly, it can be really difficult for people to deal with. So approach this philosophy with caution if you do not have a therapist, a good community of people you can rely on when you are using these new skills. Just make sure that you are sticking within your own window of tolerance. And the third thing I'm going to recommend is the philosophy of authentic relating. This is a new one that I'm getting very into. It's similar to radical honesty in that it talks a lot about how to have direct, self-responsible communication, but it does it with a little bit less intensity than radical honesty, which is probably going to feel a lot more accessible if you are just starting out in this journey of becoming more authentic in your communication. But again, you don't actually have to do the inner and outer aligning yet. All I'm asking you to do in this step is become aware of where you are not doing it and why. Tool number 4 for working with the fear of commitment is learning what no feels like in your body and being willing to say it and set clear boundaries in your relationships. If you do not know how to set boundaries in a relationship, there is an almost 100% chance you are going to feel terrified of commitment because it means committing to a life of chronic self-abandonment. Because as we go through life, our bodies are saying no to things all the time, right? Think about what you just learned in the last step. Think of all the situations in which you are tensing yourself up, resisting what's happening and trying to push it out of your awareness without ever saying no and rejecting it outright. So the more we say yes when we mean no and no when we mean yes, the more we are creating a chasm between the way we feel and the way that we are showing up. And the bigger a chasm exists between reality and our inner state, the more dissociated from the present moment we are becoming. In order to stay present and engaged with our lives, we have to use our yeses and our nos, use our body information to inform the choices that we are making, so that we are not sitting in front of someone completely distracted by all of the resentment and pent-up frustration that we feel. We have let that go by setting boundaries, saying no to things we don't want, and now we can actually just be present and receptive to the person in front of us, right? And when we can be present and receptive to the people in front of us and they're doing the same with us, it is so hard not to feel loving and excited about the opportunities that exist in the present moment. The more present and engaged with reality we are, the more authentically we are acting. And the more authentically we're acting in our attachment relationships, the less we fear commitment because we are actually showing up as ourselves. Now, I want to make a point here that is probably self-evident, but deserves being said overtly. You might notice in this process that the partner you have chosen is not someone who would necessarily take well to you showing up more authentically. The partner you have chosen is likely someone who, if you came into the relationship with a huge amount of ego defenses online, has complementary ego defenses to yours, and actually likes your ego defenses more than they might like you as a person. That does not mean there's something wrong with you as a person. It just means that when we are afraid of our true authentic selves because we have this internalization that there's something wrong with that self, it's very threatening to engage with someone else who is in touch with that part of themselves, because it reminds us that we have that too at our core, and we're afraid of it if we have a lot of toxic shame from growing up insecurely attached. So I am not suggesting that doing this work is going to be sunshine and roses for your relationship. In a lot of cases, it is likely to lead to the relationship that you are currently in, if your relationship is a heavily defended one on both sides, breaking down. If you really struggle with vulnerability and you get in touch with that more vulnerable, honest part of yourself, if you have a partner who picked you because they wanted a parent figure who never shows any vulnerability, it's highly possible, I'm even unfortunately going to say likely, that when you bring that vulnerable side of yourself out, they are going to have a disgust response if, again, they are operating from their own wounding. And so I want to be clear that this isn't going to be a very simple battle to fight, right? The work of becoming more authentic and showing up as we actually are in attachment relationships is a really brutal road a lot of the time. As with absolutely everything I recommend on here, I am not offering you the easy solution. I'm offering you the one that is going to be the most meaningful and worthwhile long term for living a type of life that you actually want to live. So this leads us to point number 5, if you are working on your fear of commitment. If you realize that the partnership you are in is not one that it is wise for you to stay committed to long term, if you discern that overall your fear is actually giving you very good information about the fact that you don't want this type of partnership, that it would be overall not the best choice for you to stay with this person for the rest of your life, then your work becomes, if you do want a long-term life partner, if you're consciously interested in getting rid of that fear of commitment, you have to start thinking about what type of a relationship or what type of a person would you feel happy and excited to commit to long-term? And then ask yourself what barriers are currently in the way of you having that type of relationship or being with that type of person. Most people will tell you to your face that they want a secure partner when they themselves are insecurely attached, but they haven't really thought about what type of work that means they would have to do in order to be the type of person who could maintain a secure partnership. A secure partner is not going to do 150% of the work for you. So if you err a little bit more avoidant and you really like the other person to take on all the emotional labor and all of the vulnerability in the relationship, you're not going to get that with a secure partner. And if you are anxious on the attachment spectrum and you want a partner who hides all of their vulnerability and who is always strong and regulated and competent, you are not going to find that in a secure partner. A secure partner is going to have their own vulnerabilities, and they're going to need you to be strong for them and serve as a secure base just as frequently as they do the same thing for you. So really think about what you're saying when you say that you want a secure partnership, if that is a phrase you use. Think not about how to snag a secure person. Think about what skills you need to develop to build yourself up to be the kind of person who a secure person would naturally fit with. This might mean working on either your self-responsibility and ability to regulate yourself emotionally on a consistent basis if you err more anxious, or making yourself more vulnerable and willing to take other people's needs and wants seriously and make meaningful compromises because you actually value the relationship in a real way if you err more avoidant. So again, those who are significantly insecurely attached on either ends of the spectrum have a tendency to just fall into relationships and then act like the victim for being there, right? This person just pursued me so hard, so I gave in, but I don't really want to commit. That's not going to cut it in a secure relationship. You have to decide to be there. And you have to decide that you are willing to do 100% of the hard work it takes to maintain a secure dynamic, if that's something that you want long term. So this part is all about developing yourself into the type of person whose authentic self-expression includes both vulnerability and self-responsibility. If either of those muscles is very weak for you right now, you've got to take the time to build that muscle up before you can expect to have that type of connection. Like all of us at some point have met someone or been someone who claims they have a massive fear of commitment when it is super clear to everyone else around them that actually they just don't like their partner. And they're in the relationship for the wrong reasons, and they're unwilling to compromise or to actually work to make it work because they just don't want to spend their life with that person. But maybe their own insecurity is keeping them from leaving and finding a partnership that they would be willing to commit wholeheartedly to. And I want to be clear here that that doesn't mean that their partner is not a good person who is worthy of love and respect and commitment. Insecure attachment just has us out here choosing people we are wildly incompatible with because we are trying to repair the wounds we have from childhood rather than actually devote ourselves in an adult way to another adult. And sometimes we just need to call that out in ourselves. Am I fearing commitment because I have this crazy irrational fear of commitment? Or am I refusing to pursue people who actually share my interests and values because I'm afraid of getting rejected or whatever it is? So this step is all about getting really freaking real with yourself. If you are full of BS and you are just telling yourself that you have this fear of commitment when really you don't like your partner, you don't like the way you show up in attachment relationships, and you are absolutely terrified of trying for something real with someone who you actually respect and feel aligned with and compatible with, this is the stage where you have to get really real with yourself about that and start developing the skills you would need to be in a relationship with the type of person you would actually like to be with. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about for today when it comes to working with your fear of commitment is figuring out and remaining constantly vigilant to the things you have internalized as inherent to commitment that might not be true. So what does that mean? I mean that when we are young, we all make assumptions about what it means to be in a romantic relationship long term, to have a family, to be in connection with other people. Sometimes the things that we internalized were true in the family dynamics we grew up in, but are not true to all dynamics everywhere. And in reality, we could be doing a lot of creative designing of the relationships we'd like to have. So an example of this is that for the longest time in my own life, I felt very ambivalent about becoming a mother. At this point, I currently do not have kids. But for the longest time, I felt like there's a part of me that absolutely loves spending time with my nieces, that really enjoys the thought of starting a family. But there was another part of me that felt very scared and resistant to that thought, because I had internalized this idea that to become a parent, you have to turn off your brain. You have to dissociate from the parts of yourself that are intellectual, analytical, that are kind of wired into what's happening in the world and all of the interesting things going on. And you have to let your entire brain get taken over by like diapers and dumb songs about sharks. And so for a long time, when I thought about motherhood, I thought that that was the exchange I was saying yes or no to. Am I willing to turn my brain off forever in order to have kids? And so, of course, I felt terrified at the thought of committing to being a mother. And I remember at one point, I went on a first date with someone who was super into developmental psychology and who talked at length about all of their reasons for wanting to become a parent, which were things like, I find developmental psychology fascinating, and I would love to experiment with different modes of helping my kid acquire language and learn to regulate their emotions. And it would also be fascinating to learn and have my own assumptions routinely challenged through the art of being a parent. And sitting across from this person for the first time, I realized there is a totally different way to approach parenthood than the way that I had internalized. If I could bring my whole entire analytical, intellectual self into parenthood, then that would probably be the healthiest possible environment for both me and the child. And at the end of the day, this is how we need to be approaching every aspect of attachment relationships. Do you have preconceived ideas about what it means to be a partner, to have a partner, to be a parent, to exist in any type of social role that involves another person in a committed, lifelong way? And the more we can start being precise about what things we have internalized as ways that we have to show up to be in any of these roles, and the more we can challenge whether or not those things are really true, the better an idea we get of the type of partnerships and family dynamics we are in control of creating. And those partnerships and family dynamics should be direct extensions of who we authentically are. Because again, the more we can be showing up as our whole, complete, authentic selves in any type of relationship, the more that fear of commitment is going to start dropping away, because we're taking the poisonous things out of the smoothie, right? And so our bodies are no longer going to be panicking, trying to eject the things that we aren't being honest with ourselves are just not working for us. Okay, that's all I have to say for today on this topic. As always, let me know in the comments what your thoughts, feelings, experiences are listening to this. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other and your inner children, and I will see you back here again super soon.